So welcome everyone. This is Dr. Alana, and this is a short video that is geared towards your professional. What does it mean to be a professional on campus? And I'm very, very excited to introduce, and I'll let them introduce themselves, Professor Scott Lanyon and Nuru Adriamalina. I hope I said that correctly, Nuru, both from the University of Minnesota. And just as a background, at the end of this conversation, there were some questions from you at an earlier time, which we will address, that came in through the WooClap system. So with that, Scott, if you'll introduce yourself, please.
Yes, so I'm Scott Lanyon. I have the privilege and honor of serving as Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Education at the University of Minnesota. I'm also Professor in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior.
And Nuru.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Nuru Adriamalina, Director of Academic and Professional Development for the Graduate School.
And we're so thankful for you. And this conversation started because of some interactions between our network and your network. And so Nuru, should I just kick it off to you to have the conversation about what we're doing here today?
Sure. So basically the idea here is that there are really two kinds of professional relationships that you as graduate students will have that are really critical to your success in graduate school and then afterwards. One is obviously to maintain an effective and productive relationship with your advisor. But just as importantly is to develop a large and supportive professional network that will be critical for you pretty much throughout your career. And one of the barriers to actually being successful in that space is if you behave unprofessionally. And so the purpose of the seminar or webinar today is to help you figure out how to avoid acting unprofessionally, and also to some extent to help you with some guidance on how you might respond if others act unprofessionally towards you.
So it's kind of a subtle thing, what is professional and unprofessional.
That is correct. And so that's one of the challenges here is for us to try to help you figure out what constitutes unprofessional behavior. And trust me, all of us have behaved unprofessionally at some point without realizing we were doing it. So that's one of the challenges. So one of the things we want to talk about is what is unprofessional behavior? How might you know if you've strayed over that line and acted unprofessionally yourself? And what do you do about that when you realize that your actions were unprofessional? And then lastly, what should you do if you are the recipient, if others behave unprofessionally towards you?
So what is unprofessional behavior? I think you have some scenarios for us.
We do. So we're going to provide a number of scenarios. Written communication is this first one. We'll talk about verbal communication. But there are also some unique issues in electronic communication, so we're going to give you a scenario for that as well. And then lastly, there are opportunities when you might reach confidence. And we think that's a really key one. So we'll have a scenario for that. We're only going to give you these few scenarios. Obviously, there are lots of ways, unfortunately, for you to behave unprofessionally. So we encourage you throughout this and afterwards to be somewhat introspective and think about your own behavior and other ways in which you might be behaving unprofessionally.
So let's look at the first scenario, which is the written communication. Jordan received an email from an organization he was not interested in joining and asked to be removed from the listserv. He received another email from the listserv, which aggravated him. So he responded with an aggressive email threatening to sue if he was not immediately removed. So the listserv manager explained that the unsubscribe request was received, but processed shortly after the second email was already distributed. So what we would like to stress is that assume that people's intentions are good and give them the benefit of the doubt before you get angry and start assuming that you were disrespected or your request was not received or you're being ignored. And never send something you've written when you're mad. it's really important to take time to calm down, reread, process what happened, again, thinking the best for the person in terms of that they had good intentions versus they're not responding to you. And ask yourself if you would say or write the same message if the person were in the room or on the same Zoom video conference with you. And would you say the same thing to your advisor or parent or someone you respect? And if the answer is no, you would not write that to somebody you respect, or I would not say something that uncivil to someone that you consider a guide, then you probably should not say it to that person. So the important thing is to process, take time, reflect before you respond, and not to respond to somebody when you're angry.
Can I just jump in for about this one because it's electronic and people may not be aware that they are writing a person when they complain, but it's a system that does or does not take them off. And in a case such as PD.education, several parts of the system send emails. So if a person unsubscribed from one part, another part would still be sending an email. Technology systems are complex, lots of things overlap, and yet there's a person who gets the email response for the other. So just to be aware that they too are trying to figure out how to use this system to help you.
Exactly.
All right, so that was a written form of communication. Let's talk about a verbal form. So Pat and Taylor are lab mates and have been working on a difficult research project for weeks. Pat accidentally mixes two chemicals that are not compatible, negatively impacting their experiment. Taylor is shocked and yells, "You idiot! What the heck were you thinking? This is why I didn't want to work with you. Even the undergrads know not to mix those two chemicals. Damn it." So, a couple of things here. One, very similar messages here to written communication. Everybody makes mistakes, right? Everybody's going to make a mistake at some point. Verbal abuse, beratement, profanity are never acceptable responses to a situation like that. If it's the first time they've made a mistake, be lenient, be understanding. If they repeatedly make a mistake, bring it to somebody's attention is appropriate. And then if you're going to review somebody's performance, you're going to talk to a supervisor, going to provide feedback either verbally or in writing, make sure you're evaluating the performance, not the individual, right? So in Taylor's reaction, it was a personal attack on the person and their intelligence, right? Not on the performance. Don't attack the person. Criticize, perhaps, evaluate performance. That's different. If you're doing it, if you're talking to a supervisor or someone else, refer to evidence. Don't just say that, "Oh, this person always makes mistakes. They're always messing up." Provide specific examples, because unless there's specific examples, no improvement can happen. Another piece here is never criticize somebody publicly. Publicly shaming or calling out someone is not professional under any circumstances, even if you're the supervisor. Right? The other thing we wanted to point out here is that it's not, because of the virtual world in which we live, we're interacting via Zoom now and so on, what we're all learning is it's much easier to be unprofessional and uncivil in a virtual environment. Partly it's because it's really fast communication. And as Nuru mentioned, you really want to take time before you respond, sort of filter your own thoughts before you say something out loud. Now, one of the advantages in the virtual world that we live in is that you have the option to mute and to video mute yourself if you're really mad, right? And you should take advantage of those opportunities. Next slide.
So this one also talks a little bit about the electronic world. Avery is a newly admitted doctoral student participating in a university-wide summer program before starting graduate school in the fall. The program participants develop a blog site to share resources and comments on the program. Through the blog, Avery berates each of the peers, mentioning their department but not their name. Student in Department X has bad breath, student in Department Y has body odor. I think student in Department Z is gay but is sexy. Because the group is small, it is easy to identify each student and the blogger, the only one not mentioned in the post. Avery confesses to submitting the comments saying it was meant as a joke. So this actually happened. And one of the things to remember when you're part of a blog or social media platform is what is the purpose of that blog? So this is a group that exists in a professional context, and the blog site has a professional intent. So if the comment you want to post isn't about graduate school and graduate education, then it's inappropriate for the blog. So just think about that to begin with. And then you're adding these comments and berating your colleagues makes it even more inappropriate. And again, you would ask yourself if you would share these comments with people if they were in the same room. Would you say to student X that they have bad breath if they were in the same room? You probably wouldn't. So it's not something that you should write behind their back as well. And so something you would not want to post. And if a mentor, again, your parents, somebody you respect, knew you were doing this, would you do it? And if the answer is no, you wouldn't do it, then you should not post it. But also be aware that, especially in academia, if you are relying on funding, admission to certain programs or fellowships, there are real consequences because people may not want to be associated with the behavior that you just conducted. And so they may pull offers of funding or admission to certain things if they know that you are part of something so unprofessional. So please know that there are real consequences to your behaviors. And the advantage of having all the technology in front of us today is that things can be done very quickly. You can quickly send messages, you can quickly post things. But the problem with that too is that you don't have the time to process because you always feel that you need to send, you need to respond, you need to post. So you don't have the luxury of processing and thinking about things before you respond. So just remember that you need to take time to really think through what you're doing, what you're saying, because what you write can live in the electronic universe for years, and you won't be able to find a way to track your communication to remove them when you feel that you have done something wrong. So it's important to take time to process ahead of time before you decide to hit the send or submit button.
Yeah, things live forever, don't they?
Yes.
I'm appalled by simple mistakes, let alone big mistakes that looking back, you think, what was I thinking?
And just as a follow-up to that, not only do these things, once they're electronic, live forever, but they're also seen, you should assume they're seen by absolutely everyone, right? So if there's anybody who you would be embarrassed if they read what you just wrote, you should not send it because chances are they will see it, right? And recognize that because they stick around forever, this could impact future hiring, future opportunities, collaboration you might want to have with somebody. These are things that in this day and age, unprofessional behavior has really huge consequences because the potential audience for that unprofessional behavior is enormous. So be very, very thoughtful before you put anything down in writing and before you hit that send button.
I kind of think there's two things as I'm listening. I'm hearing one, is not to take things so personally.
Yeah.
That what is going on out there isn't meant for us personally, and if we respond like it is, we're the ones out of line, not what's going on out there.
Right.
Yeah, that's a hard thing when to keep that metacognitive awareness going takes time and appreciation and good feedback and a good network of people who will tell you when you're not square on. So perhaps if we just said to somebody else, I do it here, I would have somebody look at something I'm not, if my stomach's saying, this isn't quite right, then I have somebody else look at it before it goes out.
Yep. And I do that I've been in this profession for a very, very long time. There are many times when I write something and then let it sit overnight, and I look at it again with fresh eyes after I've calmed down the next day, and typically edit it or completely delete it.
I had one last spring that I wrote 4 times. Every time I interacted with this person, I wrote one. And I wrote it again, and I wrote it again until I got this sentence that correctly said, we can't do this anymore. This is not working. Okay, so confidentiality.
Our next topic here, confidentiality. So Morgan tells Emery that he or she is struggling with depression and will no longer participate in their study group. Emery tells Hayden that this changed to their group. Morgan asked Emery to keep the information confidential, but Emery feels that it's important for peers to know what Morgan is going through so they can offer support. All right. So first off, it's unprofessional to break a confidence, right? This is something that you have, and so you have to listen very carefully and make sure that you acknowledge for yourself that the information I'm receiving now is confidential, not to be passed on to anyone. Now, let me switch the scenario slightly. What if Morgan hadn't actually told Emery it was confidential? Well, my advice to you is use your judgment about the nature of what's being shared, and more often than not, assume that Morgan actually said it was confidential, even if Morgan didn't say that. All right? Even if it wasn't stated explicitly. It really is Morgan's information to share, not yours. So in general, assume that things are confidential. It's not yours to pass on. The person who shared it with you will do so if he or she thinks it's important to share. Okay?
Yeah.
And this, I don't know if this is true, but it feels to me like, certainly in academia, this is a very difficult one because we're all about knowledge and information. So the fact that I have knowledge, I want to share that knowledge, sort of thing. Well, this isn't professional knowledge. It's not disciplinary knowledge. It's personal knowledge. It's not yours to share. So you have to be very careful about it.
I think even disciplinary knowledge, Scott, I see we're running into an ethical issue with data.
Yeah.
When it's not our data, when it's data that's out there, how do we, so I think don't share specifics, share generalities that can't, until you get permission to share specifics, is probably the stronger professional platform to stand on.
That's exactly right. You're reviewing a paper, you're reviewing a grant proposal. Nothing you read there is something that you could share with others.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next one. So those are your scenarios, right? Just some examples of ways in which somebody might act unprofessionally. But we help point those out to you. So how do you, on your own, in your interactions, how do you know if you're acting unprofessionally? What would the clues be to that? And partly recognize that professional conduct is something you're going to have to learn. You're new to graduate school. So understanding the culture of the graduate school is something you're going to have to figure out. And if you're coming from a different lived experience from your advisor or other faculty, then you're really new to this. So that just makes it even more challenging to know when you're acting unprofessionally by the standards of that of your new environment, new graduate school. So the advice we have is really to pay attention to others so you can learn from them. And I'll let Nuru talk about sort of this.
Sure. So if you're going into an unfamiliar culture, the most important thing is to observe. What is the culture like in this new environment? How do people communicate? How do they interact and behave with one another? How are things, quote unquote, done around here? And if someone's behavior changes towards you after an incident, ask that person if you had offended them. So instead of going around asking others, unless there was a bystander familiar with the incident, you can ask that person if there was something that was said that was offensive. But going to the person whose behavior has changed is important to ask if there was anything that you did that offended them. And if behavior is directed towards somebody, but you wouldn't do that to your advisor or a mentor, then it's probably something that should not be directed to anybody else as well. And if you don't want to be excluded from academic or social networks that could impact your academic professional development, it's really important to know what sorts of things offend your peers, your colleagues, your mentors, and not do them, because you really don't want to be ousted from your professional networks because of your unprofessional behavior. So it's really important to observe how things are done in that environment and make sure you know what is considered offensive and appropriate in that culture.
So what should you do if others behave unprofessionally towards you? And this is probably the toughest one, because the answer really depends on who it is that was acting unprofessionally towards you and what their power relationship is to you, right? And so what are the consequences of you calling it out? You can have the next slide. So let's go back to this verbal communication scenario. So this is where Pat and Taylor, there's a conflict here because Pat messed up in the lab, right? So let's put yourself in the shoes of Pat, right? Taylor just yelled at you in this lab situation. What do? Well, the first thing you do is to apologize for having made a mistake, right? I mean, that was the start of this. It's important to own that. It was an accident, but it had negative consequences for Taylor, and so you need to accept the responsibility. If you're really upset by this unprofessional behavior, the next step is to apologize and simply remove yourself from the situation to diffuse it. Now, it's also possible that you're going to be so upset because this really is, yes, you made a mistake, but Taylor made a bigger mistake in many ways in terms of the unprofessional behavior. If you're really, really angry at that response, you may not feel that you have sufficient control to apologize. So just walk away. Walk away. We'll talk about this at a later time. All right. Now, it's also a question of whether you bring this to anybody's attention. You know, it may be that that Taylor was really under a lot of pressure, and you're not going to, and it's never happened before, you may not say anything. But if it has happened before, probably do want to talk to a supervisor or your advisor, but that gets complicated because it's possible that your advisor displays the same behavior. And basically what Taylor's doing is just mirroring what has been observed. So you may find that you don't feel comfortable going to the advisor. At your institution, there may be an office to which you can report this, and not just report it, but to ask for advice on how to handle the situation. This is another opportunity to say, this is one of the times when one of the reasons why it's so important for graduate students to have mentors in addition to their advisor, somebody they could go to if they can't go to the advisor about the situation, to be able to go to a mentor who usually isn't in quite the same power differential relationship with the graduate student. They can give you advice on how to proceed.
And the Office of Graduate Studies?
If you actually find that this kind of behavior is not just typical of Taylor, but of the advisor, and it's really difficult for you to handle, you should seriously consider looking for a different advisor and changing, because this, even if you address it, chances are it's going to go on for a while because that's the nature of these individuals.
And from my experience, graduate studies offices, graduate schools usually have someone in place that can at least help you find someone who can help you.
That's right.
Always know you will not be the first student who's ever had some of these complaints, and you should speak up sooner rather than later.
Correct.
So in the electronic communication where Avery went and berated the fellow students in a blog, what would you do if you were one of the students mentioned in the blog? So instead of talking about Avery behind their back, gossiping to others about what was done, the best thing to do is to go straight to Avery, go to the person and tell them that what they did was wrong or unprofessional and that it was hurtful. So really address the issue at the source instead of creating a rumor mill or a gossip mill. So that's really important, is just to have that conversation with the person who did the unprofessional behavior. And anything that you would respond in an electronic setting, again, as we mentioned, would most likely be seen by people outside of the group that you intended to receive the message. So it's important not to sort of do the same thing that Avery did and then now go and badmouth Avery to others, but just to go straight to Avery and stop the vicious communication. So we would recommend just talking to the person directly.
And back to the confidentiality scenario, imagine that you were Hayden in this scenario and that you'd received this information about Morgan from Emory. What would you do? And I would recommend that the first thing you do, if you hear information that seems pretty personal, if it were you, you would want it to be confidential if it was your information. So what you would do in that circumstance is just to ask Emory, is this confidential? Did you have permission to share this with me? In doing that, one, you have a sense of how private this was intended to be. You've also alerted Emory to the fact that that might be unprofessional behavior. And that's part of this, is helping you understand how you learn what your behavior of your own is unprofessional, but how you help educate other people about what you consider to be unprofessional behavior. What if you were Morgan in this scenario? What would you do if you learned that this had been shared? Well, tell Emory, again, it's go to the person directly, not electronically, go to them directly and let them know that that was a confidence that you had shared and that you were hurt by the fact that they shared that. The best thing you can do.
Yeah.
So you can also go to your advisor or mentor, unless they were the recipient of unprofessional behavior, for advice on how to respond to behavior that was made towards you. And it's really important to have multiple mentors, because your advisor cannot be everything to mediate situations in your graduate life. And also, if maybe the advisor was a recipient of unprofessional behavior, you want to talk to somebody else, or gave was the one who behaved unprofessionally towards you, you want to talk to somebody else about how to respond to that behavior. So it's really important to have multiple people in your life you could go to and ask for assistance about a certain situation, and think through several incidences with you so that you can process things in your own professional way.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that we have a set of slides. There are other resources, job preparation, and all of this comes under that heading as part of what you can find on your pd.education site. These slides have those links. These slides are in the handouts, but for people who are watching this at another time, if you put in the title of today's webinar, which we'll see again at the beginning, at the end, those slides will be up on the PD Education site, so you can have these as live links. But you can see that there's a lot of other things that come into this, the biases that you have, how you work in teams, what your communication skills are. This was a very succinct, and I love the scenarios, putting it together, of much bigger topics. So we all are here to support you for that. And there are also some, there's a scientist's guide to email etiquette. There's some best practices for professional development. These are things available in the web, specifically geared towards the US culture. 5 annoying personalities that you'll meet in graduate school and how to handle them. So just to know again that you're not in this alone, and more links. So lots of links. Talk to family, talk to mentors and friends, work it out with other people when you don't know. Now, from WooClap, we had a few questions come in. Yes, everything is available. There are links on the site that you can go to get the PowerPoints back. And whenever you have completed 7 hours, it's possible that you'll get an endorsement from this answering the second question. But I think the third question is worthy of a minute or so. What if these conversations about professional development play up against or create a tension with the culture I came from? And yet I was brought into this university because I represent that culture. And yet I'm getting this message not to be who I am, or that's what it feels like. What do I do?
So my response to it is that in this whole diversity space, it's sort of an agreement, it should be, between the program and the individual that they're both going to learn from each other, right? And so as you're coming in to a new program, it's almost like you're going to a different country and you're learning a new language. It is incumbent on you to learn some of that language, but that doesn't change who you are. But the more you learn that language, the more opportunity you have to influence that culture that you're now in. So it's really a compromise, right? That said, I do want people to constantly think about how much change they themselves are doing. We don't want to change people who they are. We want to help you become successful in a new discipline and have a successful career. So that will require some learning on your part to learn that culture. But we don't want you to change who you are as the process. And if it sounds like a program is requiring that you change who you are, it may not be the right program for you.
And so when I came as an American into Irish culture, I had a lot of things that I would say that caused a little silence around me.
Right.
But now those same people have realized who I am as a person, and they will set me up to do those things when they want to do those things, but they can't. For instance, Americans are blunt. Irish people are not blunt. So when a blunt thing needs to be said, they will say, Alana, what do you think about that? So be aware, if you're in that, be aware that you will see those changes as they get who you are, you'll feel more comfortable and they will appreciate who you are and use that to the group's advantage.
And
So
I would add that if you want to change a particular culture, you can't do that as an outsider. They won't hear your voice.
well done.
Yeah. So you
That's
do
right.
have to know how to change things in the environment if change is what you're seeking. So it's important to, as Scott said, learn the culture, learn how to communicate in it, and then act for change once you're in the culture.
Yeah, yeah, that's create change. Wonderful. Thank you both very much for being here. I'm stopping the recording. Thank you, everyone who's watching afterwards. And we hope this has been helpful to you in your professional development.